Welcome to our podcast, Chat with Junko and Bola. My name is Ojo-Yoshida, Editor-in-Chief of the Ojo-Yoshida Report. In each episode, we invite a subject matter expert for conversation. We ask probing questions to provide our listeners insight and clarity on the news of the moment.
As we get into it, there's a couple of things that we want to know. One is driver state. So we've found that the ideal way to do that is actually with a camera, but we have to control the lighting in the environment so we don't get shadows and things that throw it off. But we can tell where the driver's looking, if they're starting to fall asleep, some patterns that might be indicative of their driver state. And we tie this together with exterior sensing as well. We see a pedestrian stepping out into traffic ahead of us, and the driver's looking at their phone.
We have two special guests for today's podcast. Two gentlemen from Magna, actually. One is Chris Van Dan Paulsen. He's a Magna vice president, responsible for radar. And another executive is Tom Hubbard. And Tom is a product director, interior sensing systems at Magna. Hi, how are you?
Good. Fine.
Okay, with us, there's also the co-founder of Ojo-Yoshida Report, Bolaji Ojo. Hi, Bola.
Hello, everybody. Glad to have you on this show today. Looking forward to it.
All right. So, the purpose of this podcast is I was talking to the gentleman before we started this podcast. Now that we have this sideshow of robotaxi things a little bit over, well, might come back to that, but it's like for now, we can really focus on how we can make vehicles driven by human beings really safe. So let's start with Chris. Tell me what's going on in the bigger world of the regulations. For example, I'm hearing that NHTSA is coming up with the new spec for NCAP. NHTSA has been usually kind of laggard, when you compare to your NCAP. But this time around, it seems like NHTSA is a little bit gung-ho about how to take care of the not only the people inside the car, the safety of the people inside the car, but also people outside the car, meaning pedestrians, cyclists, and so forth. So let's start with the NCAP, next generation NCAP. What's going on?
Yeah, I think, Tom's probably more into this than I am, so I'm going to turn it over to Tom in a minute. But, there's always been this push, one upsmanship between Euro NCAP and the US, both with the FMVSS, the safety regulations, and the 5-star programs. There is a big, a lot of attention recently that's been paid to pedestrians, looking at how the accidents happen, look at where the statistics are, and what we need to do about it. Pedestrian accidents at night are a big concern. Children left in hot cars is a big concern. So there is a lot coming on. It's got a lot new government attention to it. For details, maybe Tom, you might be able to fill in with more.
I think you kind of hit on the point too. I think they've learned a little bit about the technologies and what the technologies can do, and I think they're going to drive as we see things like being able to have better performance or things like this at night. You saw things maybe Jungo in the Infrastructure and Job Acts, like Chris had mentioned as well, where you're talking about understanding the driver intention. You see even things like incapacitation or intoxication also showing up in there. So there's a lot of interesting avenues that NHTSA can go. Again, looking for the roadmap release as well, and what that's going to drive some of the technologies into the future.
All right. So the before we go further though, both Chris and Tom kind of mentioned that this is, a lot of avenues, as Tom said. This is not, we're not only talking about the safety of the people outside the vehicle, but also safety of the people inside the vehicle. Can you touch upon both and how it is different the way we used to think about safety of the vehicle?
Chris, you
Yeah,
take outside, I'll take inside.
Okay,
could
all right.
definitely, yeah. On the outside of the car, we had historically looked at like, how do you crash the car? How well does it crash? Or how, when we hit a pedestrian, how bad are the injuries that result from that? So you end up with things like the shape of the car, how you would hide wipers so they're not a point load, for head impact and things like that. It is rapidly moved towards preventing the accident. The emergency braking, the first emergency braking things that came out was kind of a gentleman's handshake on just car to car rear end collisions. And that's, some low hanging fruit. That's about 1.2 million crashes a year just in the United States. But now looking at the pedestrian accidents and how they happen, pedestrians have started to be brought into the emergency braking approach. Cameras, radars, those sensors are able to do it, with some of the daytime functions. And if you look at most of the pedestrian accidents, there's been some studies with AAA years ago where they studied where they happen, and it tended to be some warmer states, and it tended to be mid-block, maybe in the city where people are coming out to their parallel parked car and step into traffic, areas like that. And even if they were at night, you're still in a city in most of those cases. Now you start to get up to higher speeds and higher fatalities. These tend to be more dark roads, higher travel speeds, bicycles, pedestrians, etc. And it's going to continue to get harder and harder and harder to get into more and more safety. There's always let's get some, even if we can't get them all. But you should always start there. Try to do as much good as you can. But then really, let's save some more lives. And to do it, we're going to need to be able to see in the dark. Thermal cameras help with that. Better lighting helps with that. There are things that we can do that are coming, and there is now more and more of a government focus on this is where the fatalities are. Let's save some lives. Also, like we saw with the Kids in Cars Act for backup cameras. If you remember, like 2018, we were able to get backup cameras mandated.
Right.
There were some interesting studies about how many kids you could hide behind different vehicles, and how backup cameras can help see in that area. The next thing is to look inside the car and the safety inside the car. And we've seen the stories that, show up in the news, and it's always a tearjerker. Any time you lose a kid or an adult or a pet even, it's a problem, and we want to fix it. And Tom, maybe you can go into some of the ways that we've looked.
And those are things that can be completely solved, right? So with this types of technologies, we can actually solve and end kind of these types of tragedies. But we had mentioned, the start of, I think you mentioned seatbelt warnings, right? And the progression in the inside, again, wearing your seatbelts, big savings, right? The invention of airbags, right? And a lot of this has come along quite quickly in the market. Again, not quickly in the time frame of the last 15, 20 years, but understanding how they're deployed and things like what we can understand with the use of different technologies in the car to understand and more personalize the crash is really a very interesting thing. So again, a lot of my background was developing airbags and seatbelts prior to this, and you always wanted to come up to that perfectly tailored system, right? The airbag deploys directly for you, for your type of person, and various others. So those are some of the things that we're working on. But you can boil it down and look at, what are some of the low hanging fruit, right? Things like drowsiness, things like distraction, and these are things that they're not 80% of the accidents. So there may be 10% of accidents are caused by, say, drowsiness or somewhere in that same range with distraction. But again, easily solved. And those are the things that we want to try to develop on the inside of the car.
If I may quickly jump in here, Tom, you've talked about our goals, the objectives, the things we want to achieve. Let's talk about the technology. What can you address specifically, inside the car? What are those technologies that are the latest that have been brought to bear?
So I'm actually going to spin the question around on you a little bit. It's actually a really good question, because the challenge, I think, in our industry is not about what sensor can I have for that application. It's what am I trying to solve?
Right.
And so we focus on how do we solve that equation? How do we get things like, if I want to understand health and wellness, right? How do I understand I want something like a heart rate? So what are the best technologies that we have out there? And then how does that fit into the portfolios that we have in Magna? And Magna, for us, we have a lot of different things to look at. How can I look at the seats? How does different, say, lighting in the car? What is the application of things like millimeter wave radar, vision? And we try to say, what are the right pieces between, say, cameras and millimeter wave technology and seat mats and touch sensors and really understand the holistic picture of the driver to be able to do those kind of things.
All right. So I just wanted to, because you talked about all of these various elements and folks and government and everyone that's involved. And I realized that your company and your competitors, you're getting pulled into and in various directions with regard to the vehicle. And one of these is the issue of privacy. You talked earlier on about collecting information within the vehicle itself. Where do you find yourself and how are you coping with the challenges involved in the application of the information and the data that's collected within the vehicle?
Yeah, Bo, that's a great question. There's always a government aspect of the whole thing, and getting a license to transmit in 77 gigahertz and be our own radio station is one aspect of it. Safety and, meeting FDA requirements to meet FCC requirements and all that kind of stuff is there. But in addition to that, there is privacy. The GPDR in Europe, and there's, relatively similar things in China, Canada, around the world. We have to meet all of those requirements. In some of them, it's data collection around the world. We want to make sure that our cars are marked. There's a QR code people can, capture on the side of the car and see if we've captured them while we were driving around trying to collect road data. Maybe we captured a person. But we're meeting all of those requirements. We also have strict policies on length and duration of data that we can hold. Anything that might be identifiable as to an individual, how we control that data, how we get rid of the data, hold the data, restrict access to the data, all of that. When we get into driver monitoring, Tom, maybe you can jump into this. There's not a capture today of an individual, but as we work with OEMs, vehicle manufacturers, what different things might they want to do to be able to unlock the car, perhaps for a specific individual?
Yeah, again, it kind of comes down to that when you talked about GDPR and things like this, the acceptance of, say, driver monitoring in Europe, even with things like GDPR, is there, right? So it's as long as you can process it within the requirements that they're looking for. Again, like for something like driver monitoring, we're processing one frame and throwing it away, right? But what more can you do with that? And that'll always stretch maybe some of the requirements. And again, the market I say the regulations here are going to be fairly dynamic, I think, over the next few years of how you look at the balance of, say, privacy and safety and what is acceptable from the standpoint of public. Because you can always hit a button and say, I consent, right? And that consent can give you a lot more value. Because if we can have information to understand you're driving, say you're driving, I mean, I think transmissions do it today, right? They learn you over time, but they don't know you, right? They know the person that's driving this car, and it learns it over time. And you can do similar things in a very private mode, right? I'm not Joe, I'm XYZ. And we can develop things and improve things by understanding the information. But it's always going to be kind of this balance, comply with the regulations, how the regulations change, and really try to give the best possible performance for the drivers and passengers.
For my youngest, I just bought her a car that actually has driver monitoring in it, and I programmed my driver one or whatever, and my radio stations, my seat position, my mirror position, whatever. And it's kind of neat when I get in it now and it says, "Hi, Dad," and then slides my seat up and does whatever. So I must have checked okay on the box because it does recognize me, but so does my phone when it face unlocks. So there's times where we want to agree to it when there's a convenience and a value for it.
Yes, correct.
Interesting. All right. One last thing, which might not be germane to what you do. Well, I guess it does because at the Ojo-Yoshida Report, we talked to a lot of chip companies, right? And the chip companies who make compute processor inside the vehicle, or chip companies who make radar chips, chip companies who are, the camera chips, right? How do you decide with which suppliers you work with at Magna?
There's a lot of tech scouting that happens because we want to know what's happening in the industry and where are some of the breakthroughs that are coming and happening. And through tech scouting, we can see people, developing the next generation radar chips and, partnering, make versus buy. Is there, are those chips usable in my next generation, whether it's an imager, for a camera or, a radar mimic or a high speed processor for the massive amounts of data that are coming. And there's always trade-offs, I mean, for $10,000, I could probably buy something cool, but you never put that on a car in mass market. So there's always a cost trade-off. There's always thermal, is it so hot that I have to run, antifreeze over and cool that thing
Oh
down?
no.
Or, how much power does it take when you think about total utilization of my available wattage for an electric vehicle? Does it reduce my range if I do this? So there's a lot of items that we're balancing in there to try to get to a product that brings the most value. And it's not always just like, how do I just get this down to $5?
I
It's
always thought
really
that
like,
was the thing that OEMs are going for.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
yeah,
end,
but
in the end,
and it's an
it
interesting
might wind up there. Yeah.
yeah, but it's an interesting point because the comment and I think what we bring kind of from Magna as well is that we understand and we supply all the different sensing technologies. We know where they are today, and we see kind of where they're going to be growing in the future. And that's always kind of a good conversation with the customer to say, what do you want to grow into? And and you could not necessarily what's the lowest cost today, but what is the lowest value for the lifetime of the vehicle, right? And being able to provide and grow the feature sets within the, because I can see we're seeing it already too. The software you have in the car when you buy it may be dramatically different than the software by the end of life. And so you have to also take that into account as part of kind of the business case.
Great. So now the real question I would like to ask is something, for you to disclose something that your competitors would like to know that you're working on, talking about the future. I realize you are probably not going to do that. So give me the next best thing that you can talk about. What's the hottest thing that intrigues you at Magna that you're working on now?
In the radar space, this would be the imaging radars that are coming. And the imaging radars, to Tom's point, some of these cars are coming out with a subscription model. And if you buy a car in 2025, let's say, and you own it for 10 years, some of these car companies are charging $200 a month, $250 a month subscriptions to the car. In 2035, are you still paying $200 a month for that subscription? If you are, then you should have seen 10 years of, it didn't work on that highway when I bought it, but it does now. Or it's got some amazing feature to like pick up kids in a school zone surrounded by buses, or, something happened over those 10 years that got better. Something amazing kept happening. And you keep spending $2,400 a year on the subscription model on a 10-year-old car. If that's the case, what's the requirement in 2035? We don't know. We don't know what it is today. And it's changed the model for these sensors because the sensors in that subscription model are now just the best sensor I can buy. It's no longer the same as the NCAP model, which is when that car launches, it has a 5-star rating and it keeps that for the duration of, even if the 5-star system changes, it keeps its 5-star rating. So I need to pass the requirements in 2025. And we know what those are. So now drive the price down, get the cheapest one I can buy that passes the requirements. But if I'm talking about the subscription model, it's more like not the cheapest one that meets the requirements. It's I've got this much money. What's the best sensor I can buy for that much money? And it's a big shift in the sensor supply space. And imaging radars on the radar side is one of the ones that's coming that competitors would probably want to hear about. Those are the ones that are also on our website, so I'm not giving anything away.
Wow. You know, but
Well,
that's whole the subscription model that you just mentioned, you know, that by itself actually needs a different podcast because it's
Yes.
fascinating because in a way subscription model is selling the products on the premise of the future when we can't really predict the future, correct?
Yep. Yeah. 10 years of ownership. Think about that.
That is that's a red, I mean, in my mind, that's a red herring. Okay, my last question to both of
well,
you
and
is
maybe Junko, because we say we were going to throw something maybe from the interior space, and I knew
Yeah.
you got a glimpse of it a few months ago out in Arizona. So really trying to solve the impairment question, right? So
that was a
you've
good
got
one. Yeah.
speeding and alcohol, two of the biggest causes of fatalities, especially in the U.S. And we haven't been really, we've been pretty open on where we're trying to go with some of these technologies. And I think really the industry has to, we talk about what is kind of secret, but I think we really have to be all of the different OEMs, or excuse me, our competitors and things like this. We need to be able to start promoting these types of technologies to show things like NHTSA that it is possible to solve some of these problems. And so I won't go into the exact technology, but you know that we're working on it. We've been showing it in some of the things as well. So
That's true. It's important because it's not a pie in the sky. You already have the technology you can put in place in a vehicle. All right. So my question really to both of you is that since a lot of people are selling the future and we don't know what the future holds, but among all the blueprints you guys have seen working with OEMs, I'm not asking you to name names, what would be the coolest car that you think, oh my God, this changes everything? Sort of what would that entail in your opinion?
I'm a car guy, so styling has a lot to do with it. Any one of them with like scissor doors that go off, those are always the ones that attract me the most. But in terms of the technology and the things that are coming, the stuff that we've been reading out there with the car companies that are trying to get to level 4 with the cruise control button. Your cruise control button will allow you to check out. We've seen Mercedes already launch level 3. I think they have them in Nevada now. They have license to operate in Nevada, maybe California. So it's coming. We're seeing it more and more. And we're seeing the orthogonal sensing and the big compute. We're seeing the LiDARs, cameras, radars, huge compute systems that maybe are also liquid cooled. They're so big and hot. The stuff that Tesla has been working on, that's been trying to get there as well. It's all starting to come, and it's pretty exciting. When it happens, it's going to be the breakthrough that offers up maybe bigger operational design domains. That's the key thing. Even if we keep the driver in the loop and call it level 2, what if we could go hands-free level 2 in a neighborhood that doesn't have any lane markings and has a 25 mile per hour speed limit? The complexity of that ball rolling into the street and what we know that means, like that kind of stuff is coming. And that's the part I think is exciting.
All right. Very good.
Tom,
On that note, we're looking forward to the future, but thanks for spending time with us. And let's talk about subscription model at some other time.
okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
very good.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much for your time,
Good luck.
and good luck with the business.